This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this is episode 627 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. You're probably a little sick and tired of only hearing my input about prospects in this year's class, right? Like, you probably want a little bit more flavor. So I got you. Each year I bring on guests to talk about incoming rookies. Today's show is all about quarterbacks. Next week will be wide receivers. The week after that, running backs. For today's quarterback show, I brought on a yearly guest, my friend Jim Sannes. I worked with Jim for years over at NumberFire and FanDuel, and I can tell you that it's tough to find a better analyst. He's worked with quarterback data for years, so I was excited to pick his brain about this year's class, which seems to be pretty underwhelming. Jim explained the data that he looks at when prospecting quarterbacks. He talks about where this year's draft class stacks up to others in recent history. He gives us player comparisons and so much more. It's a really good interview to get you up to speed on this class. Now, before getting into that interview, baseball fans, the lockout is over and the start of the 2022 MLB season is set. With opening day scheduled for April 7th, FanDuel is ready to get you in on the action with daily fantasy baseball. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com and click on the Thursday MLB opening day marquee contest. Then make your lineup of players, sit back and enjoy the start of America's most beautiful game. For only $4, you can enter a lineup and compete for a chance to win part of $400,000. Head over to FanDuel.com today and get ready for MLB opening day with FanDuel Daily Fantasy. Eligibility restrictions apply. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app for more details. Now let's get to this interview with Jim. All right, Jim, so we all know that quarterback evaluation can be pretty tough, but you've got a quarterback model that helps predict how good incoming rookies are going to be. So I'm curious, what kind of data inputs are you looking at to make that model successful?
Yeah, so back testing to see which quarterbacks who go in the first round are successful. And it's first round limited because I wanted to see, like, typically non-first rounders don't do a whole lot. So I focused mostly on first rounders to see what translated well. And what that led to was putting efficiency in the model. So looking at their final year QBR, because that accounts for rushing and includes sacks. It accounts for competition, stuff like that. There is AYA, or adjusted yards per attempt too, but the primary efficiency number is total QBR because of the reasons mentioned there. Age, like just raw age, not breakout age, not like anything like that. Just raw age is in there because you look at successful first round picks, they tend to be younger guys, and then also experience level. So for me, that's a number of games with 10 plus pass attempts because I want to, see how much volume there was in there. So if you combine age and experience level, you can get pretty far based on that because it's similar to what you discuss a lot with like wide receivers, like early declare stuff. Because if you are in the NFL draft as a younger experienced player, what that means is A, you were talented enough to earn playing time right away, and B, you were good enough to declare early, be told you should declare early and stuff like that. So it's not because young people are better. It's because it's an indicator of talent if you forced your way onto the playing field earlier or able to declare earlier. So, looking back at first round quarterbacks since 2010, there have been 11 guys who have been top 10 in NumberFire's total net expected points in 1/3 of their qualified season. So 11 successful, I would say, first round picks. And they've ranked on average in the 82nd percentile of my model pre-draft. So not accounting for draft capital, though looking at those guys and then 82nd percentile, the less successful first round picks have been 62nd percentile on average. So it's a pretty big gap. If you look at the post-draft model, which does include draft stock, it's 91st percentile for the hits versus 83rd percentile for the misses. So obviously everything is jacked up because it's just first-round picks there. And draft capital does matter a lot. But it does seem like at least putting some weight in what the model says can lead us down the right path to seeing who is more likely to succeed.
So given that model, there's been a lot of talk about this quarterback class and this quarterback class not being great, getting a lot of hate. But given that model, how does this class stack up against classes in recent history?
Yeah, the hate's pretty fair, I'll say. I think that you look at it, I want to look at the top 5 guys in each class. So comparing the top 5 guys by ratings for this year versus the top 5 in draft capital from previous years, 2010 on. And this is the first time that not a single guy in the top 5 was in the 80th percentile or higher of my pre-draft model. There's never been a class where there's been nobody in the top 5 in the 80th percentile or higher. Before this, the record for the lowest high-ranked guy was 86th percentile. That was in 2013. Geno Smith, 86th percentile. That was the EJ Manuel season. We know how that class worked out. So that's not great. So there is, like, I would say, a historic lack of star power in this class. The depth isn't as bad. It's better there on average. The top 5 guys in this year's class are in the 67th percentile of my pre-draft model. Last year, they were 90th percentile on average, so probably should have gotten a quarterback then if you could. So 67th is not that bad. It's just not as good as last year. But, you know, it's not historically bad as it is based on star power. But the worst one by that method was 2011. So you had Cam Newton. He was very good. Andy Dalton was fine. But other guys in the top 5 there were Christian Ponder, Jake Locker, Blaine Gabbert. They were all 20th percentile or worse. Nobody in the top 5 here is that bad. Like, Malik Willis is the lowest ranked guy. He's much better than those guys. So it's not nearly as bad from a depth perspective, just like not any real, like, true star power here.
So given that, and given, you know, what we've seen historically, what your numbers say, do you think that there are any quarterbacks in this year's class then that sort of warrant top 10 consideration?
Probably not. I wouldn't personally. And that's from someone who, like, is generally pro taking a quarterback early, just because, like, it's such a valuable position. If you're in position to get a quarterback early, you should take advantage. But every single guy in this class has reasons we should doubt both their floor and their ceiling. It's not just doubting their floor. It's not just doubting their ceiling. Every single guy has a reason to doubt both those things. If I were doubting just their floor, fine. That's totally okay, because I don't care about floor that much. You can get Mahomes, you can get Allen, it's worth it to take on some risk. But if we're doubting both their floor and their ceiling, then it gets a lot harder for me to justify taking them top 10.
So your model right now has Kenny Pickett as the top quarterback in this class. Now, I am a somewhat biased, Pitt graduate. I love Kenny Pickett from that perspective, but I recognize that, you know, he doesn't have the best profile coming out of school, of course. We keep hearing bad things about him, though, whether it's his age, whether it's his hand size, what have you. What are some of the good things that the model likes about him? Why is Kenny Pickett the number 1 guy in this model?
Yeah, so from like a numbers perspective, there aren't a ton of like legit red flags on him outside of his age. His age is a big one. Like, that is an actual legitimate red flag for me, because it says took him a long time to declare. He started, you know, pretty early, obviously, at Pitt, as you know. So, like, it's not like he couldn't earn his way on the field, but, like, it took him a long time to be good enough to be able to declare for the draft. And that is kind of concerning. But there are some good things here for sure. He was efficient. His last year obviously led Pitt to the ACC championship game. That's pretty solid. His total QBR was 81.2. That is the highest in this class. And he's one of just 2 guys in this class above 80 in that number. The average successful quarterback in the first round is at 83.5. So Pickett's still below that, but he's the closest of that group getting to that total QBR threshold. He's also super experienced, which is good, because if you're going to be old, you would better be experienced, and Pickett very much is that. 51 games with 10-plus pass attempts. That is like a 100th percentile, basically, number. So he is old, but at least he's experienced. And I think that does at least partially alleviate the concerns. It's not like, again, it took him forever to get on the field. He just didn't, it took him a while to be efficient and declare. So I have other concerns around him. The defenses he faced were really, really bad this past year. His age is tough. It took him a while to be efficient. So there are concerns there. But there is a reason the model likes him to an extent, and it's because he was efficient, he is experienced, and those things do matter quite a bit.
All right, so talk to me about Malik Willis. You know, should he be the consensus top quarterback, at least in fantasy football? It sounds like you like Pickett a little bit more, at least your model does in real football. But from a fantasy perspective, do you think that Malik Willis should be the QB1, or would you just follow the model and go with Kenny Pickett?
No, for fantasy, it's definitely Malik Willis, because it's a lot of things. It's because it sounds like he'll be the first guy off the board. You look at the betting odds right now, he's the favorite to be the first quarterback taken. That matters a lot, obviously. He runs. Those 2 things matter so much. So that's a good thing. But my model doesn't like him in terms of projecting him as like a real world quarterback, because he's older and less experienced. Like, we talk about age a lot with Pickett and guys like that, but it's actually a concern with Malik Willis too. It's a really brutal combination for a quarterback to be older and less experienced. Of the 11 successful first-round quarterbacks mentioned earlier, only one of them was older than 22.6 years old when he was drafted, at the time of the draft. Only 2 guys were older than 22.1. Those guys, Andrew Luck and Joe Burrow. So you've got exceptions, but they're not the most common thing. Willis will be 22.9 when he's drafted, and that's with just 23 games of 10-plus pass attempts under his belt. Obviously, he transferred. That's a factor in that, and he had the COVID year too, but like, it's a concern. The efficiency numbers for Willis were not great. They were especially bad against quality defense. You could pin that on being, on Liberty and stuff like that. But like, it's still a concern. And Willis also took an absurd number of sacks. His sack rate, I think, was like 13.3% this past year. We talked a lot about Justin Fields last year and his sack rate. That was 8.8%. And the highest number that I have of a first-round quarterback from Lamar Jackson, that was under 9%. So Willis at 13% is going to break the record by a wide margin for a first-round quarterback highest sack rate in their final year. So I would take him first of this group in Dynasty, assuming that he is the first quarterback taken, but I think that typically when you're looking at a Superflex Dynasty draft, you're talking about, okay, a first-round quarterback who runs, they're probably going to be the 101. This year, I'd have no trouble taking Breece Hall over him, assuming that, things go to normal, even in the Superflex draft, because there are some really big red flags with Willis, and like his bust rate is very high. The ceiling is high, of course, but the bust rate is also very high.
So Sam Howell, he's your number 2 in your model. Does he have the same type of ceiling in fantasy and in real football as the other guys that we just talked about? What are your biggest concerns with Howell in particular?
Yeah, so with Howell, it's weird because the ceiling is actually the part I'm less concerned about. I think his floor is bad. I think his ceiling is actually pretty good. He has a strong arm. That gives you good access to his ceiling. He's the only young, experienced quarterback in this group, and that matters a lot. If I list out the names of guys since 2010 who were first-round picks who were decently efficient, young, and experienced coming out. Those guys, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson, RG3, Jared Goff, Marcus Mariota, Teddy Bridgewater, Trevor Lawrence, Blake Bortles, Paxton Lynch, Josh Rosen. So, there's some busts there. There are some big whiffs. There is a lot of Paxton Lynch potential in Sam Howell, but you've also got 2 former MVPs. You got some future MVPs potentially in there. I'm not talking about Marcus Mariota, but you got some future MVPs in that group. And a lot of those guys, importantly to me, didn't go top 5. So evaluators in the NFL looked at these guys and said, okay, Lamar Jackson, 32nd overall, Patrick Mahomes, 10th, Deshaun Watson, 12th, Justin Herbert, 6th, and the third quarterback taken in that class. There was skepticism around these guys. So a lack of draft capital doesn't necessarily mean that he won't succeed. So I think that he does have a ceiling. The floor is bad. I talked about Willis' sack rate a lot. Howell's was almost as high, around 12% this past year. It could have been because they lost Javonte Williams, Michael Carter, all the receivers there as well. But his sack rate is also pretty high as a sophomore and a freshman. So it wasn't just because of that. They returned all 5 starters in the offensive line this past year. They weren't good, but they were returning starters. So I secretly do like Howell quite a bit. I'm really hoping goes high in the draft. If he does, I'll be very in, but I think that the potential for him to be a Paxton Lynch 2.0, it's a very real possibility. So for me, the concern is more about the floor for him than the ceiling.
People might be a little bit surprised, but next on your list, you have Desmond Ridder over Matt Corral. Ritter's been rising a bit, especially since the combine, it seems like. But what do the numbers say about the two of them, and how might they pan out in fantasy football?
Yeah, I think Ridder is really interesting because a lot of people I respect in terms of quarterback evaluation like Ridder from a film perspective. So that's a positive for him. He is higher than Corral on this list because he's actually half a year younger than Corral and much more experienced. I think 16 or so more games of 10 plus pass attempts. So a lot more experienced, younger age as well. Corral did face a tougher schedule, so his total QBR is higher than Ridder's, but and that means that Corral could pan out. But Ridder, to me, checks a lot of key boxes. And we saw him blaze at the combine. He didn't run a lot in college, but I think it'd be interesting to see him do that in the pros more. Corral, to me, is really weird, honestly. That's the word. He's weird. I don't get him. He's older. He's less experienced. He really struggled in the situations where Ole Miss couldn't run their RPO type system. His AYA, or adjusted yards per attempt, on 3rd and long this year was 3.1. In fairness, Ritter was 3.6. So, like, Ritter didn't tear it up there. But Howell was 11.9, Pickett 9.7, Willis 9.5. Those are pure dropback situations. And Corral and Ritter really struggled. Now, for Howell and Willis, AYA does not account for sacks. So keep that in mind when looking at that number. But it's really weird how bad Corral and Ritter were in that department. This is one spot where I vehemently agree with the model, where I would rank Ritter above Corral personally. Until Corral goes higher in the draft, I'm going to like Ritter more by a decent margin, because I think that the value of that younger, more experienced prototype for a guy who does have a strong arm and can run, I think that there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, Ritter could still easily go ahead of Corral in the draft,
Sure.
just depending on how
For
things go down. So the last guy that's kind of getting some, I shouldn't say love, because no quarterback's really getting love in this class, but the last guy who's kind of getting talked about is Carson Strong. Do you have any takes on him?
Yeah, so he's interesting to watch because, like, he actually has a pretty good arm, and, like, it's not bad, and, like, there are some things that are fun about him, but he runs like 2021 Ben Roethlisberger, which is like harsh, because, like, he's had a bunch of knee surgeries, and, like, it's a bummer. It's, like, not his fault that, like, this happened, but that's still the case. It doesn't matter whether it's his fault or not. Like, it's a legit concern. His mobility is awful, like, legitimately awful. So maybe as he gets further removed from his most recent knee surgery, which was, I think, March or January of 2021, if he gets further removed from that, maybe the knee gets better. But it sounds like teams actually do view the knees as being like a long-term concern. So unless the mobility picks up, I probably can't see it happening. But, like, I hope so, because, like, he's got kind of a cannon and he's fun to watch. But it's hard to bank on that unless we know that his knees will magically get better.
Yeah, it makes sense. So let's talk about some player comps. Let's look at each quarterback. I'm just going to throw the name at you. You can give me some description if you need to, because I'm sure some of them might need some description. But I'll throw the name at you. You give me their top comp. We'll start with Kenny Pickett.
Andy Dalton? And I don't want that to be, like, a bad thing, because Andy Dalton was actually a solid pro for a while. But, like, they're both older. They're experienced, decently efficient in college. And I'd assume Pickett will probably wind up most likely towards the back half of the first round. If he winds up going like 6 to Carolina, that'd be different. But if I assume that he's not like a top 10 pick, Dalton, I think, is both like a fair comp, but also like not the worst comp in the world given the kind of flack this draft class has gotten. So I think Andy Dalton's actually a pretty solid comp for him.
Yeah, he's the kind of comp that people sort of are upset about, even though it's actually not a bad comp, because he had a really long career. He's still in the NFL. He's had a really good career overall, made the playoffs a handful of times. So yeah, it's not a bad comp for Pickett. How about Malik Willis?
Everyone else is Josh Allen. I think that's not where I'd go, because Allen was younger, like a year younger than Willis coming out. So I go Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz, older guy coming out, less experienced, not crazy efficient, but has some of those key things you look for in terms of like upside, and also will probably have pretty good draft capital behind him. So I think that Carson Wentz is where I'd go there. The two guys who pop most in terms of like being similar to Willis are Carson Wentz and Ryan Tannehill. They both shown flashes. They have their massive flaws, but so does Willis. So I think that more so than Josh Allen, the comps for Willis would be Wentz or Tannehill, and I'd lean towards Wentz there.
And understandable, both guys coming in the league as raw prospects, as is Willis. How about Sam Howell?
Paxton Lynch. As much as I am intrigued by the upside, like you think about the other guys who were like young and efficient, like Goff was there, Mariota, Mahomes, Watson. Even if they weren't like top 5 picks, most of them did go in the top 15. Howell's probably not going to. Paxton Lynch went 26th overall. So I think like from a draft capital perspective, it's going to say to us that, okay, the NFL is more skeptical here. So we should probably be more skeptical too, because the NFL, for as much flack as they get, they're pretty good at quarterback evaluation, like as good as you can expect them to be. Yeah. So I like Howell. I would go Lynch. There are some guys like Teddy and Lamar who've been good going back half of the first round, and like maybe we'll be surprised and Howell will go high. And if so, count me in. But I need to see that. I need to get that signal from the NFL first.
He's like Paxton Lynch with that like Baker edge, like personality wise.
I mean,
and, like,
Baker's like the vanilla comp.
Yeah,
I think about this. Like, what would we think of Sam Howell if Baker hadn't sucked this year? Like, what if Baker had been good and everyone's like, oh, this guy aesthetically looks like Baker Mayfield. Maybe he'll be good too. Like, is he a top 10 pick then? Maybe not. But like, I think Baker 2021 killed Sam Howell 2022.
Yeah, it makes sense. How about Desmond Ridder?
Jimmy Garoppolo, I think that's probably a pretty fair comp for him. They're super experienced coming out. He's not super old. Decent efficiency, but not against like outstanding competition because Garoppolo was at an FCS school. Likely not a first rounder, though he could be, kind of first, second round type guy. I think it's a pretty good comp. Similar to the Dalton one, where like we laugh at Garoppolo, we laugh at Dalton a lot, but like they've been starters in the NFL for a while. I think that's actually a pretty decent one for Ritter personally.
Yeah, I like that. How about Matt Corral?
EJ Manuel, older, not super experienced, okay efficiency, likely pushed up in the draft due to a bad class. I think that one, they check a lot of the same boxes, and maybe that's why I'm like wary of Corral going in, but like they have a lot of the same red flags. I think that Manuel makes a lot of sense for Corral.
And then the last one, the forgotten man, Carson Strong.
Davis Webb is the guy most likely or most similar to him in terms of the stats profile. Likely day 2 pick. Not super old, but also not super experienced. Unexciting total QBR. I mean, Davis Webb, been a backup. He's been fine, but not someone I'm like pounding the table for or anything here.
So if there is a quarterback outside the top 6 in this class that you would be pounding the table for, maybe, probably not, but maybe, who would that quarterback be?
I would say the guy that my model is highest on, or the guy my model is highest on, is Bailey Zappi. And we were just talking about the top 5 guys before, looking at them, because draft capital does matter a lot. But Zappi's actually 87th percentile of my model. He's the only guy of anybody in this class above the 80th percentile. He's very experienced, a bit younger than Pickett. That's a good thing. He had pretty similar efficiency numbers, even when you account for his schedule. So I get why NFL evaluators are not high on Bailey Zappi, because like there is a clear lack of arm strength, does not do well outside of structure, stuff like that. And those things do matter a lot. So I get why teams aren't super high on him. And the NFL has shown it doesn't have a lot of interest in this type of guy who's like kind of like in the Drew Brees, like everyone's like, oh yeah, he's Drew Brees. Like they're usually not Drew Brees. The NFL has shown they don't care too much about these guys. But if Zappi goes higher than expected, indicating the arm strength isn't as big of a concern as I think it will be, then it will get my attention. I've looked back at past non-first rounders and seen, NFL evaluations of those guys, and a lot of them, they get knocked for arm strength. So maybe Zappi winds up being a hit. I will have a close eye on him, and if he does go higher than expected, cool. I think that could be interesting. But I also do get why he's being pushed down, because his arm strength concerns do seem to be pretty legit.
As always, Jim, I appreciate you stopping by and dropping some quarterback knowledge. If any of you aren't following Jim and his work, you can find him on Twitter at Jim Sonis, and you can read his stuff over on numberfire.com. I'm also on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Feel free to follow me on there. Head to LateRound.com to see what I'm offering, and subscribe to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast so that you don't miss a show. Thanks for listening, everyone. I've got a mailbag episode that drops on Friday. I'll talk to you then.